Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us for this very important session, Designing Gender-Focused Financial Inclusion, Strategies in Action. This is a very important conversation that needs to be brought into the broader discourse of financial inclusion, and I'm very happy to present an all-women's panel for this discussion. The session will be moderated by Ms. Veena Mankar, founder Sudhar, and the panelists for the session are Ms. Nidhi Bansal, Senior Director CARE. She has also authored the Gender and Financial Inclusion chapter for the Inclusive Finance India Report 2021. And for all the audiences, you can find the report at the Resource Center on the platform itself. We have with us Ms. Pallavi Madhu, Head Advisory Services, Women's World Banking, Ms. Chetna Galasena, Founder and Chairperson, Mandeshi Bank, Ms. Yamini Atmavilas, Senior Program Officer, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. To begin the session, we have key highlights that will be presented by Ms. Nidhi, and then Ms. Veena will take forward the discussion. So over to you, Nidhi.
So, hello everyone, good afternoon, and I want to make sure that my presentation is visible. Right, I want to start by saying why do I call this chapter an evolving story? This is the first time that Inclusive Finance India report is doing a dedicated chapter on gender equality and financial inclusion. And when I started working on it, it was quite difficult to pull everything together, pull all the achievements, pull all the accomplishments that the great workforce in this sector has achieved over the past 5 to 6 decades, and also talk about what we still need to do, where we still need to go. And where I find myself is that this story has been one story of success, one story which every one of you involved in this, in bringing it to this point, can proudly say that you have come a long way, starting about 6 decades back, where women were not even perhaps considered an entity who would require any financial support or financial needs, to a place where women are seen as the bedrock of the financial inclusion world, and taking forward the economy. And each and every one of you has contributed to this story. So congratulations on that front. However, I say this with a lot of responsibility, that there is a long way to go. While we have come a long way, there's still a long way for us to go. And I want to start by quoting the General Action Plan, which says that there is global recognition of the persistent gender gap in financial services. There's also an acknowledgement that by paying attention to the gender dimensions of access, usage, and quality of financial services, the aims of full financial inclusion can be better achieved. However, we find that there are gendered barriers to financial inclusion that continue. And just to set the stage, I would like to say that these barriers stem out of the demand as well as supply side. Supply side being the supply of services, supply of products to the women, and the demand side being the constraints that stem out of the social fabric, their personal skill sets, their personal self-confidence, etc. And here is a very brief list of some of the areas that need to be looked into if we are looking at the barriers to financial inclusion. And as I said, they are the ones that impact women's full participation, women's full benefit from the financial inclusion initiatives, and also building something that can, so that they contribute fully into the economy. Having said that, amongst the Is it now? Okay, great, thanks. Yeah. Amongst the practitioners, there is an agreement that, as I said, women's empowerment and full participation is definitely needed for financial inclusion to work in India. And we also, all of us believe that majority of beneficiaries from the financial inclusion interventions are women. And when I was collecting information for this report, numbers do bear it out, especially in case of primary interventions for outreach, for access. But the story starts to change when we go beyond access. And the numbers start moving either south or numbers are just not available. Therefore, I propose that when we are looking at gender equality and financial inclusion, we need to use a continuum. And this continuum is one of access, looking at equitable access of suitable and affordable services and products, and moving on to usage, ensuring that women are actually using those products and services. Then moving on to control, not only that they are using those, are able to use those products and services, but they also are able to control the benefits from these products and services. And then lastly, all of this leads to empowerment where they are able to impact the prevailing gender norms. So this is a continuum that I propose that we as a sector use for us to assess our success as we move forward, as we take this story forward. So let's start with some of the good news, some accomplishments. And I'm sure these numbers have been repeated often in this summit. But I would just like to again reiterate and reinforce that a lot of work has gone into it, and we have really traversed the road and come to a place where we can talk about almost equitable access to bank accounts, good access to credit, and then also facilitated systems of services and supplies. So the Global Findex report shows that as in 2017, 77% of females over 15 years of age had a bank account. And this is a story that started at 26% in the 2011 report. So there's a very long way that we have come. The gender gap itself between the male and female account holding has also reduced. And we must acknowledge that the Jan Dhan account drive has contributed greatly to these numbers. There is also a sad dampener to the story that only 42% of the women account holders report that they are not using their account. So we need to keep our eyes on not only establishing the accounts, but also how they are being used. Just an example of how we need to move beyond access to usage. Same story continues to a large extent in the SHG bank linkages with very large numbers. Sometimes these numbers cannot even be comprehended by the global community, the kind of numbers that we have been able to reach in India, where over a crore SHGs are now linked with bank, and 97% of these are exclusive women SHGs. And 87% of the total savings is only of these women exclusive SHGs. When it comes to the loan size for women exclusive SHGs, it is also slightly larger than that for other groups. So SHG seems to be a very good a success story as far as women's access to finance is concerned. We all understand the limitations of just SHGs, but this is a good starting. When it comes to credit, microfinance institutions and the Salhan report very clearly brings out that 98% of the borrowers are women, and that it has increased from 94% in 2011. When we do a little bit of an analysis of the credit received by women is 27% of the deposits they contribute, as compared to the 52% for men. So there is a huge gender gap here, that while women are depositing, saving a lot, the credit that they are able to access on that is not quite same as at the same levels as men are able to. The other services beyond credit, direct benefits transfer, we saw during the COVID how the PMJDY account holders, women PMJDY account holders, got a direct benefit transfer of over 30,945 crores, which is a huge accomplishment in and by itself. And the India Stack infrastructure is definitely a big leap towards that and has enabled that. However, need to add that if same data, this kind of data of women account holders, of the poverty levels, can be applied and for other accounts like the banking system, formal banking system, these numbers could go up much more, and other schemes could also be linked to this. These numbers can become really high. And there are studies, I have quoted some studies in my chapter also, which show how these direct benefit transfers combined with training actually show an impact on other gender norms, like participation in workforce, like negotiations, intra-household negotiations. So there is a huge there's a huge opportunity which can be leveraged here. Insurance, again, women's share is increasing, however, proportionately is lower than, continues to be lower than men. So on supporting the women, some of the areas that I looked at: financial literacy, digital financial services, and business correspondence. These are the interventions or initiatives that have facilitated women's full participation, that has addressed some of the key barriers that women face, of time poverty, of mobility restrictions, of confidence in using technology. So these are all good stories to build on. The financial inclusion story that should not end only at services for products and services related to credit, insurance, etc. But I firmly believe that for full economic empowerment of women, it needs to link very closely with the enterprise development. And I looked at the PM Mudra Yojana, which extended a very large amount of loans. 68% of the loan accounts belong to women beneficiaries, which is a good number to be happy about. But when you do a little bit of a deep dive into these numbers, between the three categories, Shishu, Kishore, and Tarun, we find that most of these are still Shishu loans. So what it tells us that as women are moving up, their share in the loans is decreasing. And that's something worrying, because that could be a glass ceiling for women to women's enterprises to grow. I just was very interested in looking at the journey that has been traversed in the past decades, and I will very quickly touch upon what I found over the decades. So I see that 70s were the genesis years for including women into the financial inclusion platforms through the SHGs that were formed by Seva and Myrada. You all are very well aware of that. I don't need to go into the details. But just to remind that 70s is when the story sort of started in a structured way, with those initiatives of Seva and Myrada, as well as the some of the more financial banking changes that were happening, especially around the lead bank schemes, which later on paved the way for higher financial inclusion of women, and also the establishment of regional rural banks. So this was, government's recognition of focus on poor people's access, and yet the focus on women was not yet there in the formal financial world, that there was a need for particular focus on women, but collectivization as a strategy was gaining ground. In 80s, what we find that this was a decade for testing and trying. So there were more government interventions through NABARD, establishment of NABARD, then some of the government schemes, linking of SHGs to bank at an experimental level started in this decade also. This is where I find that there was a lot of energy around trying new ways of further strengthening the collectives that were formed through the SHG. The 90s were a decade of growing confidence in women's bankability. That's what I find, where we saw SHG bank linkage program launched. We also saw the AP Max Act passed, the SHG's bank account, savings bank account for SHGs was also enabled here. And RBI accepted SHG strategy as an alternative credit mechanism. So all of this was in a sense acknowledgement of women's bankability, and larger volumes of financial resources being available to women's group also built their confidence in dealing with money, in exposure to the formal world of finance. The 2000s was a decade of tremendous growth, and wherein the market also, not only the government schemes and systems and nationalized banks, but markets actually acknowledged financial viability of banking with the poor and women. And we saw a lot of investment during this period. We also saw the equity investments, IPOs being raised, and this was also the time we saw the Andhra Pradesh crisis. And this crisis highlighted the continued vulnerability of the sections that we were dealing with, and the need to put in place consumer protection measures. So growth, but also risks. This is what the decade told us. And coming to the decade that we are just leaving behind, the decade of 2010 has been a fintech decade. And fintech, with its good and bad, has enabled a lot of progress, and at the same time has also shifted the focus from collective to individual. Now, just to sum it up, we have come a long way, but as I said, we have a long way to go. So in this decade, here and now, we need to make a commitment to go beyond inclusion to empowerment. Some of the things that I think can help us move beyond inclusion to empowerment is embracing the basics. So while we are gradually moving away from the collectives, for women to confidently participate and to be able to access the full benefits of the financial inclusion, I think it is extremely necessary to start from the basics of hand-holding them to gain the confidence to deal with finance, and then helping them move through the opportunities that are created. Looking beyond access, I have spoken a lot about that. Building the missing middle. So where we are talking about the credit needs of women who are now, who have been part of the story for long and are now confidently moving with their enterprises, there is a need to support them to gain access to the to larger loan sizes for their enterprises. And that is where there seems to be a gap, there seems to be a glass ceiling, which needs to be broken. The financial inclusion workforce is one area which should have been a no-brainer for us to include more women in the financial inclusion workforce, if women are our primary customers. But it so happens that the workforce is around 11% women. So there is a need to not only bring more women into the workforce, but also support them to develop enterprises, like, for example, the business correspondents, to help them with the technology, with the soft skills, as well as creating this into an enterprise for themselves. So this will not only help those women who enter the workforce, but this also will help women to more comfortably deal with the financial space. Embracing technology, as technology is a given today. So we have to work with the technology, but there is a need to acknowledge that this can create a disadvantage for women who have already entered the space, because women probably data shows that women's access to mobile and smartphone is much lower even as of date, and their confidence in using data is much further lower. So when we are getting all excited about the fintech solutions, we need to also take into account that there is a need to improve the hardware as well as the soft skills that are available to women. Data is something that I would like to very strongly point towards, because for access, there is enough data available. But when it comes to usage, control, and empowerment, there is not enough empirical data. There are studies here and there that help us validate our experience and our anecdotes that we all come across in our work with women and financial inclusion, but there is not enough empirical data that is being collected for usage, for control, and for determining women's empowerment. So not only collecting sex disaggregated data, but also developing indicators for outcomes like gender equality, for outcomes of empowerment. Collectively, this platform needs to take that responsibility and give a call out that we have come a long way to ensuring access, but there is a long road ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nidhi. I think you've really set the stage for our conversation. And firstly, I would like to congratulate Access for the important step of covering for the first time in the Inclusive Finance India report, a chapter on the gender gaps and a gender focus for financial inclusion. So from this all-women panel, a very big thank you to you for that. The presentation ended with, I think, a very nice summation of some of the themes that we could take forward. And we have a panel here with, I think, over 100 years of experience between them in women, gender issues, and financial inclusion and empowerment. So who better to actually take these themes forward? I would like to pick up 4 themes that Nidhi spoke about and see how we can cover them in this conversation today. The first is looking beyond access, moving on to usage, control, and empowerment. The second is, how can we really leverage the power of digital financial services? Nidhi spoke about responsible technology. I think both on the side of the financial service providers, looking at customer protection, but also what is the access that our customers have to technology. And I think whilst Nidhi was presenting, we had the poll open. And I would just like to comment that still 60% of people have said that it is low awareness, which is one of the biggest barriers. Lack of access to a digital device is 30%. and trust in the formal system is 10%. So there is still a feeling that the trust in the formal financial system is also not adequate. And how then do you leverage digital financial services when you don't have trust in the system? Going to a branch and developing that trust perhaps is easier than going to a small BC or a Kirana store and developing that trust. Building the missing middle is the third theme that we would like to explore today. And finally, the role of data, both in making policy as well as in the design of products and services. You know, when we started out in the access, in trying to create access for financial services for women, I know that I spent hours sometimes outside bank branches trying to take 5 and 10 women inside just to open their accounts, and they were not very well received. We have come a long way from that. And I know Chetna has spent the last 3 decades in trying to build an ecosystem where men who have access could be equally balanced with women who have as strong an access. To quote Mandeshi's objective, our aim is not only to provide easy access to customized banking products and services for rural women, but also to nurture an ecosystem within which they can thrive. At least today, I think all of us are, when we talk about access, very confident that an ecosystem exists, but there are barriers to it. So my first question, I will go on to Yamini. Yamini, can you talk a little bit about what are the significant barriers that women still continue to face? Is it only to access, or is it in moving beyond access?
Thank you so much, Veena, and thank you to Access for inviting me to be part of this very erudite panel. I feel like I'm going to add absolutely nothing new, but let me just get the ball rolling. I think there are multiple barriers still that need to be reckoned with, and access is a starting point. It's by no means the end. And we all know that. I think Nidhi's presentation really beautifully captured that continuum, and also just, underwrote the need for that to be seen as a continuum. I think the barriers are multiple, right? So for example, there's the poll really nicely brought out the fact that information asymmetries continue to exist. And for women, this remains real because the gatekeepers and mediators of information transmission, of creation of that information, of information sharing are still pretty strong, and information is power. This is an old adage that we all used to say, that information is power and withholding information is a greater power. And I think today's age, even though there's been a lot of democratization of information, a lot of attempts to sort of reduce that asymmetry, it remains something that creates small islands of power. And I think there is a need to create, to really break those down and to make sure that women do get all the information that they need, because without that, there's not a whole lot that you can do beyond the access question. Now, getting information via one of the biggest forces that has democratized information is, of course, the internet. And that brings us to that second big barrier that women have, whether it's about access to digital tools, access to the internet. The NFHS really nicely shows how women's access to phones is growing. And certainly during COVID, we saw increasing use of even smartphones. But overall, women's access to internet remains pretty low. Even in the better states, the more advanced states, it's less than 50%. So that remains a big gap, and there remain multiple reasons for it. The access piece of, do you get to use smartphones just because it's in your house, or even if somebody has distributed smartphones, do women have consistent use of it? Do women, are there gatekeepers within households? Are there other more compelling users such as students, children, husbands, others who need to use those phones more? So there's lots of different ways that you can rationalize limited use. But I think the point is that there is limited use of and limited access to the internet by women. The other kinds of ways, I mean, there are, of course, you talked about, literacy challenges, numeracy challenges, skills challenges. So that definitely is a whole thing around information that really needs to be re-looked at, but not in a separate way, but in a way that's bundled with the other kinds of greater ambitions that we've got. The other big piece, of course, is what I think Nidhi touched upon, and what we hope we can come back to multiple times, especially when we talk about gender, is the question of norms, right? Social norms, gender norms, and these are very, very different for different, across the life cycle. So we need to get very specific about them. We can't just say, oh, there's this norm that women aren't very mobile, or women aren't able to do X or Y, and therefore, it throw away the, in some ways we don't even then think about those words. And I think we have to get very specific about which norm is creating what kind of barrier. When it comes to accessing productive resources, there is a norm around property ownership, there is a norm around operating your bank account, there's a norm around mobility, and it's quite distinct for different ages, different, whether you're married or unmarried, whether you're educated or uneducated, different regions in the country. And I think we need to really unpack them. There's a lot of evidence on this, so we don't need to do new research, but we need to ensure that we understand, what is it that matters to industry, what is it that matters to government, what is it that matters to people who are programming with SHGs, with the fintech providers, what matters. And we need to be smart about putting those barriers out there and saying, look, these are the barriers, and let's design understanding these barriers for this particular segment, or this particular region, or this particular aspiration, right? So to me, that's a third one. Sorry, the last
I'm going to stop you here a little bit, only because
Sure.
I think what you've touched upon is something that Chetna has addressed significantly, and I would like to go to her to understand the how. So you started out almost 3 decades ago, Chetna. You would have come across these barriers. What are some of the examples you can share of how you face these barriers and how you address them?
Sure. So I'm thankful to Access to inviting me for this Financial Inclusion Summit, and thanks Veena to invite me on this panel. So I absolutely agree what Yamini was saying, and the presentation also made some things very important. And as you talked about the poll also, right, about these trust and all. So I would say that what are the barriers? Unfortunately, I feel that there are the gender society has a gender barriers, right? And there are a lot of norms, and but sometimes I feel that women can come across those norms with their own fight, in the sense that how would I put it is that, like Mandi, she started a bank, women said we want to save, they came together. Niti presented SHG groups, right? How did SHG groups were formed? No state machinery actually was there. In fact, women came together and they formed it. So those barriers, I feel, with the role models, with something going on, women take it and they can overcome those barriers. And there are organizations working who would support them, including the state machinery. So those barriers, I think we can address, women are addressing collectively, forcefully also. But I see the barrier which is within the banking industry. I find that is very important, and that is an opportunity I see to understand. And I would just like, as Veena, you are mentioning, and I was watching the presentation. Now, one data which is so important about 55% of Jan-Dhan account are women's account. That clearly indicates that women want an access and they are coming in. In country like India, 55% is not a small number. It's a huge number. Then the question comes that within Jan-Dhan, if 55% is there, then within overdraft facility is not even a 1%. In Jan-Dhan account only. Why? So
Great
it's really
question, Chetna.
yeah. And this is when I was talking to Sidbi being a part of the committee, like Veena, we are in a different forum, right? So we say that what is where the barrier is. So the barrier, supply side wants to give, right? Because when you are saying Jandan account, you are opening the account of women. And everybody knows that banks are not opening the saving account for women either to get saving amount, right? Because the amount you are going to get is meager, but you want to do something. It's very clear from the supply side they want to do. Now the barrier is that supply side yet not, or somewhere I feel that somewhere there is a failure on our side. We have not been able to convince the supply side or make it so clear in our presentations that what is the cash flow of these women. Why have we not gone beyond from micro credit to micro enterprise? Why $30 billion industry? Women have repaid the loan, $30 billion. It's a huge amount again. Proved their credibility. Then why individual enterprises? Why still supply side needs a peer pressure? So I think, Veena, that barrier is there. And I would just like to give very small example and end there. Is that Jandan has an overdraft facility. Now, and it is as a supply side, how many mistakes I did. Let me explain that. We had all our, I mean, Mandishi is no outside support, all women are savings. We have cumulative figures of 540 crores of lending. I mean, cumulative figures are savings are in 1,000 crores. But when I was moving in a weekly market, I saw one of our women saving with Mandeshi, but taking weekly market vendor, in weekly market, taking loan from money lender. And I asked her that, you know, Mandeshi Bank exists. Why are you doing it? You know what she said? She said that you give loan for GLG, you give loan for these, you tell us EMI, monthly installment. She said, I want to take loan in morning and I want to repay some amount in evening itself. That is not available for. And so I will go to money lender, right? And that time we designed a cash credit product. This is in 2010. We did the digital diaries of money lender and digital diaries of women. And then we saw how money is moving. So here I would like to say, Meena, that on the supply side, it is so important that what is how last mile money is moving, what is the cash flow of last mile, unless we understand that and design a credit product, so overdraft facility, then again I would say that is also not enough. Poor people do not have time, right? And women all the more with the norms and everything, they hardly have time to come to bank. So what are the processes we follow? So if you make a doorstep availability, which money lender is doing it? And I am like, these money lender debates are gone now. With the technology, we can do real-time transaction at every level. And our women are getting SMS. And I am so proud to say, Veena, that I have not found a single woman saying that we are member of UPI. I mean, they talk of Google Pay and Phone Pay. They take a loan to buy a smartphone. So even that ecosystem, they are ready. They have aspirations
to adopt. True.
right, to overcome.
From
So yeah, here I would like to say that they are ready to overcome all the barriers. Ball is in our court on supply side. How much are we ready, and how much are we ready to put the trust?
So I think excellent, segue for me to go to Pallavi, because I know, Pallavi, that you have specifically looked at women-centric design for, product design and actually worked with a partner. So this would be a really good opportunity for us to understand what you have done and how you succeeded in working with a mainstream bank to do this.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Veena, and thank you, Access, also for inviting me onto the panel. And in fact, a lot of what Chitna ma'am said, I'm going to use a little bit of her inspiration to answer this question and connect the dots here, because at Women's World Banking, we have developed a women-centered design, and it includes not just designing for women, because when you, of course, when you understand their challenges, barriers, and you're designing for them, you will definitely design to impact her. But it also includes designing with the FSP, keeping the FSP in mind, because finally the FSP or the financial service provider has to genuinely see it as a solution that they can take forward. So our process is a cusp of, you know, what works for the customer or the woman and what works for the financial service provider. And when the two meet, then we have something, you know, which is commercially viable, that can go on a continuum forever, viably by the financial service provider. And this will genuinely then in the long run continue to impact women. So what we do actually is a 5-stage process, and I'll give you the example of the bank that we're working with. But in each stage of the process, like in the define stage, we look at the problem, we define the problem from the customer side, but we're also seeking to define the problem from the bank side, because it needs to align with the larger business problem. It can't be in isolation. The second stage is the diagnose stage, where we try to put ourselves in the woman's shoe and try to understand her barriers and, you know, what are the challenges she's facing. But at the same time, we have to look at the business side. So in case of a bank, there are challenges that a BC might be facing in serving a woman. So unless we solve for that, we really cannot solve for her barriers. Then on the design side, when we design the solution based on a lot of our insights, on the business side, we have to look, does it make ROI for the bank? Because I can't take it forward if it doesn't make business sense. And then when we pilot it in the 4th stage, we are checking not only is her behavior going to change, but also is it operationally feasible for the bank. And then finally, in the scale-up stage, it will hopefully, if we've done all this very well, it will go smoothly and will actually impact her barrier, all her barriers at scale, overcome them, and it will also, you know, help the bank scale it up viably on their own. So this is just an overview of the process. So we work with Bank of Baroda, Veena, which is one of the largest public sector banks. And we did this with them across all these stages. And at each stage, you know, it was in collaboration. And a lot of the parts of the stages, when we looked at whether the woman, what are her challenges, or you have to look at bank data. So I'm joining the dots on what Nidhi was saying about gender disaggregate data, because you really cannot come up with solutions unless you look at the data. And because women behave differently, the transaction data will show you that difference. The channels that they use will reveal their preferred channels and how they genuinely operate their accounts. And then, of course, it is about sitting and listening to women's and the bank's challenges. And what we designed was a solution called Baroda Jandhan Plus, which sought to overcome, the barrier that women faced, but also, you know, ways of overcoming it using the BC channel and helping us overcome the barriers that the BC would face in serving her better. And then, of course, at the pilot stage, you know, we would have to prove evidence for the bank to take it forward, and it has to make business sense. So the pilot is when you get a lot of feedback from the field force, and you can iterate and then keep changing. And at the heart of women-centered design, it's not only a process; it's actually a culture. It's about being iterative, being experimental, and and keeping the woman at the center, and always willing to make those changes depending on feedback from the field. And then, of course, now we're looking to use this and roll it out ahead with the bank.
Thank you, Pallavi. That's, I think, a great explanation. And I hope the financial service providers are listening in and can seek out, you know, experiences from you to understand what they can do as well. I'm also looking at questions, and whilst I think we haven't really covered all the barriers, I do want to go on to something which is provoked by one of the questions, which says, on digital financial inclusion, are we really ready to ensure women also reap benefits of the same? And here maybe I would like to go on to Nidhi, who made a statement that, you know, in her report, that whilst the digital financial services in the long term is going to be a game changer for the positive benefit, it's going to be some pain in the short term. So how do you address that pain in the short term, Nidhi?
So I think the answer to that question lies in what Chetna ji and Pallavi have already been describing. Part of it is we need to first acknowledge that there is going to be a short-term issue, and that short-term issue could arise from women's access to the device device itself and what could be a possible solution. And Chetnaji very clearly brought out that if women understand that there is a benefit at the end of it, they are ready to invest, they are ready to take a loan and do it. So why not facilitate that? Why not facilitate the information, and why not facilitate them to have equal access to those opportunities? So that's part one of it. Part two of it is also around what Yamini was saying earlier, information. And this information needs to be channeled down to the women. But I think a key link in the chain is the BC. And if your business correspondent is from where this the digital tech is going to be taken to the women, they need to be first empowered. They need to be first given the information, handheld to become confident in using those information. There's enough data also. I mean, we have good examples of women going out and using mobile phones and technology for very, very confidently. But the data also says that women in general are a little bit less confident in using technology. So why not make, and then the whole social environment of when it comes to younger women using technology, there are taboo associated with that. When it comes to an older woman using technology, there could be a literacy and numeracy issues. So we need to first acknowledge that each of the stages, women are going to face certain barriers, and plan for that when we are disseminating or bringing in any new technology. And that is what women-centered design, in my view, is all about. It does not look at just one product, but all aspects of the product. So it's not just about the solution, but also how that solution will be operationalized. And these operational challenges are the ones that we will need to bear in mind when we are.
I think a little bit like what Pallavi said, that you can't solve only for the client, but you need to solve for the client, the delivery channel, and the FSP. So I saw you nodding there very vigorously, Yamini. So I'm going to come back to you on this, and maybe a little bit to address the missing middle as well. And I have a question for Chetna after that. But one of the things you said to me in the conversation we had with earlier on was that in the 1980s, when we first started microcredit, there was a huge backlash to women, in terms of almost domestic violence or something else, as to how can the woman access credit and not make it available to the family. Do you see any similar backlash, or what do you see as, say, one or two of the key barriers, apart from what Nidhi spoke about, that we need to think about for the digital access?
I think the backlash can come from multiple places. But I think barriers is different and backlash is different. And I think I'll just make a point about both of them, right? I think the barriers are what we've all talked about: access, literacy. But I think what's interesting is the how of it. So one of the barriers we face is, what are the at-scale sort of platforms or channels through which one can build literacy, right? How do you do that well? Nidhi showed some pretty dismal figures in terms of how women, the feedback that women gave on financial literacy modules that they received, and hardly only a fraction of them felt it was effective. So evidence shows that peer networks are very important to adult women, to all of us, but certainly to women and girls, especially for learning, for skilling, as well as adoption of interventions, because it happens in a context of trust. You're doing it with one another. So the SAG platform is here to stay. It's robust. There are many things that are problematic about it. It's definitely not a magic wand. At the same time, it's therefore, let us make it work for women. And so if it is about capability building, if it is about skilling, and there is in the design of some of the government promoted programs, as well as definitely NGO promoted programs, that skilling is a big objective of that peer network, that kind of networking. So beyond the social capital and the borrowing and the credit, there is a learning component to it. So let's really tap that. And I think we need to really get good about this. I mean, whether your channel is through the BC, whether it's a BC with a smartphone who can pull down a curriculum that can be, transacted in a group setting where women are learning together, we have to sit and, I mean, a lot of examples exist around this. A second one is the psychological efficacy. So your curriculum can't just be technical. It can't just be push this button, take that, and then here's like 5 things to remember about your bank account, right? You have to build confidence. And for that, you have to really, I think there's enough curricula out there that build self-efficacy of women, that build confidence, that build their agency, that help them access public spaces, that help them, with their own build their own voice publicly, to build negotiation skills. So the information as well as the soft skills that we talk about in our settings, I think is very, very important to build into your curriculum. The third is, I think I think adult learning principles means you're not teaching in a didactic way. Do it in this role play, like build in the kind of principles that require. And we do this for many other things. Somehow when it comes to financial literacy, digital literacy, we want a checklist based approach, and that simply doesn't work, and it hasn't worked. So let's start take a different starting point, right? The last point I'll make is, I think the barriers is also about aspiration. And that's where this missing middle question will come in. And let's, definitely would love to hear Chetna talk more about it. So I won't belabor the point. But women's aspirations are huge. I mean, Chetna talked about it when it comes to their being, the poorest of women are ready when they know that there is a benefit, there is a pathway, there is a way to sort of express themselves and to access things. They are ready to take the risks, and they're ready to learn what it's going to take. So beyond that, I think young people are aspiring for different kinds of work, different kinds of skills, and let's meet them where they are. And one of the things we are learning is that when you bundle things, so when you bundle your product and your hard things with the aspirational things, that people absorb it better, and it actually has multipliers beyond what you could imagine. So I think we need to get into get serious about taking aspirations on board and putting in your hard economics, your unit costs, your skill set that you think matters. Let's make this actually big and interesting and ambitious in a way that matters to women. The last, I think, is, I just wanted to say this point about the data and information, right? I think we all
talk about you on data, Yamini. I'm going to talk to everyone, so I'll come back to you.
All right.
But great. I want to go to Chetna on the point of the missing middle that you raised before we lose the thread. So, Chetna, 2 things. One, there is a question for you from the panel, which I want from the audience, which I want to put to you now. And also my own question for Chetna ma'am, is it fair to expect to put that onus on women to fight these barriers? So a little bit, if you can address that. And the second thing is, what did you do post-pandemic to really address the missing middle? I would like to hear from you on that.
Sure. So first question is putting the onus on women. In fact, I am not a person who is saying putting onus on women, but women are taking onus. What I'm trying to say, is that if they get an opportunity, and I'll give you one example, and then I immediately come to the second question, that post-pandemic, actually, Mandeshi decided to give immediate loan because people had lost everything, right? And men actually, it was other way around, that because men lost the job, women got so much of responsibility. So we immediately launched one product, is 9,000 rupees loan immediately to women so that they can set up some business after first wave. And it was like at the doorstep. And what we did was that we said, if you repay this loan digitally, you get rebate in interest. In 3 months, we did 5,000 loan. At that time, 10% of women had a smartphone. In 3 months, we did 5,000 loan. But in 4th month, when the repayment started coming in the 5th or 6th month, we got 40% women having smartphones. What I'm trying to say is that there are ways, and as Yamini very, very nicely you said that you have to bundle the aspiration and core economics together. I think that is very important point. That unless you, once you do that, that becomes meaningful and valuable to whole community. It does not become a women's issue. It becomes a family issue. It becomes a community issue because you have bundled with the different achievements and aspiration both. So I leave it here and come to your answer question, Veena, is missing middle. And here I will talk that in another thing, that when in post pandemic we saw a lot of women were doing business at home, and but they wanted to scale. And on one side it is digital, but on other side it is also mechanical machines. If I'm producing say 100 chapatis, and if I want to do 200 chapatis, if I want to have a sprout of 1 quintal, if I want to sell dal, make dal of 2 tons, how would I do it? And so we design a product. Similarly, this product, we design a product where you can get a loan for hypothecation, and where you can buy machine. And not only just we design the credit product. Actually, Pallavi, when I was listening to your design part, I was so much like, women were so interested in buying machines for their businesses and scale their business. But we found that machines are not available. So then we have buses now, where buses have all the different business machine, where women can experience, because it is also experience of using the machine. It's an investment, right? If I invest, if I take a loan, buy 200,000 machine of dal mill, and what if I cannot operate it? So what we did on foundation side, we have 2 buses, and here, and then design the product, hypothecation and cash credit. And we were so amazed to see that more than 4,000 women bought the machine, took the loan, and scaled their business. I mean, how are we going to bring that missing middle, right? Missing middle also will have to build that ecosystem of credit rating tool, the softer aspect. First time borrower, she's not on Highmark or CIBIL rating. So you will have to create a credit rating. And we have a partnership with State Bank of India, where we have designed a credit rating tool for State Bank of India for Mudra. So on one side, these are the softer aspects you will have to work out to address the missing middle. And then there are hardcore like machines, how women should, and this is not available. Only in India, we found the 2 places, Coimbatore and Rajkot, where we could find the machines for small businesses. And otherwise you go to China. There is no other place in the world where you will find it. So I would end here, but what I would like to say is that when you want to address the solution of missing middle, on one side, softer aspect of the supply side is great, because bank also have a pay. It's not very easy for bank to say, okay, we'll give you the loan. And then what if my NPA rises? I mean, as a banker, it was difficult for me to convince Mandeshi Bank CEO also to give the individual lending without peer pressure. She said, I don't know, what if the repayment does not come, right? So when on one side, peer pressure works at a level, but afterwards, if you want to address, you have to create those softer aspect like credit rating tool, Udyam Aadhar, cash flow, digital trajectory of all women, which is possible. How that will be possible by having these Mera Khata, all those software where women can enter their businesses, and there the digital financial literacy becomes very important, right? So, and then having machine to scale the business. So I stop here, Veena, and I say that.
Thank you, Chetna. You've given us a lot to think about, but Pallavi, I will come to you from that. Because when you work with the mainstream financial services providers, what I hear Chetna saying is that there is an opportunity here. What we need is data. Now, financial service providers have data. How can they leverage this data to address the missing middle?
Right. So, yes, they have a lot of data, and very rich, in fact. and very actionable data, because it is at a customer level, it's transaction over years. It's just about looking at it and, making a lot of sense, and looking at it obviously from a gender or a sex disaggregated manner.
So do
Specifically,
financial institutions look at it in a sex aggregated manner or no?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. And thankfully, the gender field exists. So if you're interested, you can look into it right now. So I'd, request all FSPs to definitely go and look into the data. And it can be all kinds of data. I'll give you an example. If you're on a liability side, you can look at balance data. You would see that women hold higher balances. If you want to look at transactions, you can look at transaction data, and you will see that women might prefer going to different channels compared to men. For example, they might be using more BC channels vis-a-vis the digital channels. Even if you want to look at digital data, you'll find that women do use UPI, but it might be smaller transaction amounts. So at every single data point, whether it's channel data, whether it's product data, on the asset side, you look at NPAs, women are better at repaying loans vis-a-vis men. And if you look at it in a gender disaggregated manner, you'd be surprised, Veena, the kind of insights that you can cull out, basis which then you can come up with products which are very viable for banks, if they could only look at that data.
Thank you, Pallavi. And I will go back to Yamini. I have a question from the audience, Yamini, which I will pose to you. And then I would like you to talk about the data aspect that I held back for the conversation on data. So the audience member says, I don't know if this is the right session to bring it up, but when will we start addressing the third gender with financial inclusion? Do you have any views on that? And also, I want you to explain or elaborate on the point on data that you were making when I moved to Chetna last time on the missing middle.
Sure. I mean, it's hard to disagree with that. What the point that question is really trying to make, the audience question, which is that when you mean inclusion, you have to mean true inclusion. And we have to go beyond binaries, and we have to look at our own sense of identity, etc., much more inclusively. And I think the debate is slow to move. I mean, the field is slow to move there. At the same time, I'll say that, a limited experience we had at, with our very large program called Avahan, where we worked with sex workers on HIV. So as that program grew and our own sort of sense of what it's going to take to truly empower the community grew, and that included sex workers and transgender populations, the recognition that social protection, financial inclusion, livelihoods, peer networking, all of these different pieces are very critical to truly meaningfully empower any social group. And so in that, we have some limited experience in that programming. And in fact, the evidence from coming out from that program showed that financial inclusion and linkage to formal financial institutions was one of the big game changers as that program sort of matured and as these communities evolved much more strongly. So I mean, it's sort of there in the government sort of system as saying, you must include excluded groups or, marginalized groups. But I couldn't agree more that this is something we have to get into when we talk at, and we shouldn't just be talking about men, women. I think even when we say segmentation, it's also inadequate. So definitely a point we should take that, so let us make it truly diverse and truly inclusive when we talk about including the marginalized and the excluded population.
And the vulnerable. Yeah.
I
couldn't agree more, Yamini.
Yeah. Just a very limited point on data, I think, is that, Pallavi made a really great point and sort of laid out what's the kind of data that's available with industry. Nidhi laid out what is it that we are tracking on at a sector level, and where does government data exist? There's scheme data, there's DBT data. I mean, a lot of these enablers now are coming into our ecosystem to make sure that even if we don't do large scale surveys, we are able to understand and capture some information. Now, the question is, it's not data for data's sake. So one can get hugely and set up very, Christmas tree data systems, but never use it. So my own bias is more that once you start getting committed providers, committed decision makers, whether it's on the programming side, like care, or whether it's on the government side. Once you start getting people to look at data and start using it and sort of start to say, hey, I know this, but I don't know this, then the need for that, what's missing, the missing data will come. And so rather than imagining all possible variables that one might need, let's start using what we have. So that would be my first principle when it comes to data. It should be user oriented, it should be user driven, but you need to agree that you need to program for the excluded and the vulnerable and the marginalized. Now, having said that, completely agree that gender disaggregated data within what's available is sorely lacking. We don't have enough identifiers. We do have a lot of metadata that we can start to use. We do have SCG data. We do have DBT data. And I think in a way that protects people, we should start to use and understand certain things. And a very small point on the missing middle question, right? I mean, we have lots and lots of women nano entrepreneurs. To Chetna's point, women are there, they're resourceful and they start small businesses, but they're not able to grow when you're in that SAG if they're coming out of the SAG context, because they don't have individual linkages. So the business data and the individual credit data doesn't get linked. Now, there's a reason for that kind of a system, because you want to protect and make sure that women have pure collateral. But at the same time, maybe this is a time to really sit down and think, how do you grow enterprises? How do you grow as, and design your products and your loan sizes and your risk aversion in a way that keeps up with the poor's aspirations. And I think we have to crack the incentives of the financial providers to really make bigger bets on poor women. And what those could be, we have to I think this panel is a great sort of place to start, and this conference is a great place to start. But let's really double down and get about 20 people in a room and say, okay, what is it that you're afraid of, and what is it that we can do to incentivize greater borrowing, and what kind of data is missing, where can the data piece fit in? Now, data disconnected from all else doesn't make sense, but data can be a great tool and a great input if we have the right users and the right intent to use it. So that's my submission on data. Thanks.
No, thank you. I would like to come to you, Nidhi, with a question. You did raise about data, and we need to, collect disaggregated data. One of the things that we do have is that women may be using a phone that doesn't belong to them. So they may register for a program such as, a health program or a literacy program, and give the telephone number of the husband or the son. Now, when this data comes in, whose data is it? Is it the woman's data? Is it the man's data? How do we deal with this problem?
I don't think I'm the right person to be responding to this particular issue, but it's this particular, the situation that you are describing is important to understand from many perspectives, not only from a data perspective. Yes, from a data perspective, this is an important one. If we are depending on just that as the source of data, source of defining whose data it is, then there is an issue, because in India, we do have a phone that belongs to a household and not to the individual. So yes, that question definitely needs to be cracked. That should we go beyond just the who has registered the phone on their name, to really tracking the usage. And that's what I would like to reiterate the point that it's not just access data that needs to be collected, but we need to start looking at usage. And that's where a lot of things that are perhaps currently hidden will come out. So my point is not that women are not using. Perhaps women are using, and perhaps we do not know about that story. And that's where we need to start designing our data collection also for usage, so that it doesn't, women's empowerment, women's ability to use, and the channels that they are most comfortably able to use are not hidden behind this lack of data and this gray area. So that is exactly what I would like to reiterate. And also your point about just a usage just an access point becoming a source of data masks a lot of work that is already happening. So we need to commit ourselves to looking at real data, maybe not on a census or a survey mode, but at least as a way of understanding how these millions of women are actually using. We are all talking about the aspirations and how they are actually bundling things on their own to fulfill their aspirations.
So, question for you, Yamini. Talking about the softer issues of control, empowerment, agency, how do you measure those, and what are the strategy you use for your grantees or your investee companies to really measure these?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple ways to measure women's empowerment and whether interventions and programs or products are truly empowering them. I mean, Pallavi spoke about some, Chetna spoke about some, Nidhi also highlighted a few. I think the way we have a bit of a framework around women's empowerment that I'm happy to share after this session with everyone. But essentially, it's looking at individual agency, voice, and increasing women's own sense of efficacy and confidence. Then there's a broader circle of access to resources, right? So are they accessing the right kind of resources? So there's a material dimension to empowerment. And so are they accessing those resources, like, whether it's financial resources, whether it's assets, whether it's economic resources, opportunities, etc. So there's a framing around the access to resources that can be, multiple, including social resources like networks and peer groups, etc., etc. And there's a larger sort of the bigger circle is around institutions, right? And so you have family, community, market, and state. And a lot of times, I think we end up sort of thinking about women's empowerment purely as improving their decision making or voice within the household. Even NFHS measures a lot of that. But actually, for this conversation, it's so meaningful when you sort of start to think, how has Mandeshi really empowered women? Is because you build their ability and their own, confidence to negotiate markets and to negotiate providers, negotiate with banks, with financial systems that are so large and so complex. I mean, I hide every time somebody calls me from one of these financial service providers, because I don't even have that language in the vocabulary to sometimes, understand whether I want to say yes or no to something. So I think that negotiating those institutions and systems is where we really need to double down and say, let's bring together our financial providers, our states, our intermediary organizations that are trying to build these linkages, and start to measure that. And I think there we have a few of these kind of indicators that we have where, I think simple things like, do women have the information? Do they have, in agriculture, we say, do they have the market support price? Do they have the minimum support price? Do they have that number? Do they know it? Do they know the technology, where to access the technology? So very similarly here, do they know the interest rates? Do they know how to negotiate? Do they know the fine print? Do they, are they able to negotiate? And do they know who to go to negotiate things? I think there's a whole system like that one can build, and it's going to be a little bit customized to different kinds of interventions, but it's very important to have that kind of framing and not forget the institutional negotiations and not leave women's sort of empowerment and agency only
within the family. Yeah, very restricted context. So over to you, Chetna. How can you give us some concrete examples of what Yamini has been talking about in the context of the women, either at the missing middle, the entrepreneur level, or how they move out from really getting recognition in the family to also being able to negotiate in the community, commercial and financial space?
Sure. Actually, it was very interesting. Let me give you an example of one of the lady that will make it, very a concrete example. we have one program where we work with little bit of elite entrepreneurs. When I say elite, it's not elite, but who can handle the capital of say 500,000 rupees. I'm not talking about here women who have 50,000 loan or who are part of the JLG loan. In fact, we have women who have, like in market, we see that 3-4 loans are there, right? So we have started working Mandeshi, and even with Mavim also we have started working, and we are focusing women who have like beyond 150,000 to 700,000 rupees, that business. And what are these
That is really the missing middle.
Yes, exactly. So how do we, either help them to go there, or if they are already there, how do we make sure that they don't drop out? Because it's a very big number of dropout also. And when we started working with that, what Yamini was saying, we started talking to women. What were the things, where were you cheated in your business? And we were surprised to listen to them how they were cheated. I mean, I'm not going into details, but I'm just saying that it's not like somebody cheats them, which means like, take away something, right? Somebody will say that this majority of them said, we were told that we will be paid, they will wholesalers buy from us and they will pay the amount, and we didn't get the 100% amount. It is so common, and there are many other things. I'm not going into details. Then the thing comes like, okay, whenever it's not, you cannot say, I will not give you udhar. You cannot say that in the businesses. You have to take the risk, right? So then, but how do you create those systems for you that you are least cheated? You are in a market. Whatever forces are there, they are there, right? So you have to, and so anyway, I would just not go into details, but we have designed a special Deshi MBA program for these missing middle, where, it's like an MBA program for them to scale this. So that is how this in market, how do you, and also you create your own credit rating tool also. It's like you yourself assess how much capital is required. And we saw so many women actually with the market research had come for a loan of 700,000 rupees, but they required just 300,000, or it can be other way around also. But these are the things. But one another additional thing I want to add is about the collateral of the women, collateral for women. I mean, if you want to build this missing middle of women, if you want to reduce the gender gap, Mandeshi has been very aggressive on this whole property rights issue, or have a property rights, or have something. And I would end here by saying that, if we want to raise, who are the players we want? It would have been so great in this panel if we have a chief minister of Odisha, if we have a chief minister of Telangana, because these people have really been doing a lot, which we actually are don't know. Or maybe the Maharashtra's chief minister has a special office of women and entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Because these people have power, and they can get, and a jump can really go
Yeah.
up.
It can really be exponential. No,
Yeah.
what you say is very right, Chetna. I think, working with the state and working with the ecosystem and infrastructure is very important, because without that, I mean, you will realize the difference when you started and there wasn't an infrastructure for financial services which you could tap into, you had to create it. Today, what we're talking about is really the infrastructure of digital financial services is there. And I would like to take a question which is coming from the audience and address it to you, Pallavi, because you work with mainstream financial institutions. They're asking, might be repetitive, but how can we ensure that digitization does not sideline women who have established themselves as active stakeholders in the SHG and the MFI movement? So going from JLG and SHG, and are they going to get sidelined with the digital financial infrastructure?
Yeah, so I do think that Nidhi answered this question, so it might be a little repetitive. She did say that you have to have both digitization and the mainstream channels go hand in hand. There is no one kind of woman. There are many kinds of women. Like 50% may already be digitally enabled, and they should definitely take advantage of the benefits of the digital infrastructure. But the rest of the 50% will definitely need the support of the BC channel or the regular SHG processes. So it's not there is no one method that fits all. You need to try everything, and they need to happen in parallel. So not to get too excited with the fintech, like Nidhi said, that will happen on its own energy, and that's great because there are a lot of business forces working towards that. So while that happens, continue to support the mainstream banking channels, because there is the rest 50% of women who need to be serviced without digital.
Thank you. So we have, I think 8 minutes to go, and I would like to just sort of highlight the results of the poll we had, which was what is now happening in the 2020s. In the next decade, do you think the gender gap will be completely eliminated or significantly narrowed, somewhat narrowed, or not change much? And I think the majority have come to somewhat narrowed. So whilst that is not too optimistic, or I don't want to be pessimistic, but I do want to ask all 4 of you to think about one segment that you would like to give a message to, which can impact, and bring about a faster narrowing of this gender gap, either to the policymakers or to the financial services provider. In 1 or 2 sentences, what would be that message? I would like to start with you, Nidhi.
Thanks, Veena. And I would say my message would be to the practitioners. Neither, they could be the policymakers or they could be the service providers. For us to think beyond where we have come. We have come a long way, but also now to look at usage, now to look at bundling, now to look at this missing middle. So my real trust is towards look at where women have already come, but build on what is needed. And this missing middle is, for me, the biggest area which we need to work as practitioners, where we need to combine the norms, combine the practices that women are currently undertaking, and build a product that will work for bridging that.
Thank you. So you're really looking at product design and attention to that missing middle. Chetna, 1 or 2 sentences, brief.
I would just say that I would go to market. There is an opportunity. There is a lot of business, lot of innovation, and digitization can actually drive aggressively if you address missing middle owned by women, particularly. Yeah. Market is, for me, important.
Going to market for the mainstream financial service providers. Thank you, Chetna. What about you, Yamini?
I think I'll just, Chetna took the words right out of my mouth. I really think that this next decade or so belongs to action that we need to see from markets. And, we're all ready to work with them, partner with them, provide data, information, innovation, thinking, etc. So I think that's where the solution providers, that's the kind of where I see the next decade or so of work.
And you, Pallavi? Thank you, Yamini.
Yes, very similar to FSPs. In 2 sentences, women customers are valuable and they're a viable customer segment for you. So please invest in understanding and developing products for them, because it makes business sense. That's it.
So I know Chetna has to go for another panel, but before you leave, Chetna, 1 more question to you. If you were to answer the audience poll, in the next decade, do you think the gap will be significantly narrowed, very little narrowed, or not made any difference at all?
Significantly narrowed, I would say.
What do the other panelists say? Yamini?
I think so too. I mean, demographic change is happening. Costs are coming down. Norms are changing. I think I'm very positive that gender norms are changeable. They're mutable. And, Mandeshi is such a great example of how that can really happen and change broader society and change acceptance. So I do think that I agree.
Pallavi?
Yes, significantly narrowed. We just need a couple of good examples, and then it will suddenly everybody will follow. So yes, significantly narrowed.
Nidhi?
Absolutely echo all the panelists, significantly balanced. And it only requires our will.
So I do agree with all of you. And on that optimistic note, I would like to thank each one of you for being on this panel. It's been a marvelous and engaging conversation. I have learned so much. And thank you so much to the audience for keeping us on our toes with your questions and engaging with us. And thank you to Access. As I close, I think Access, there were 1 or 2 pointers for you. Get 20 people in the room to really discuss what needs to be done, and also get policymakers in the room with the women that you have here to impress on them that there is opportunity to make significant change to narrow the gender gap. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Veena. It was so engaging panel. Such a great curator. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Rightly put, Chetna ma'am. This was actually one of my favorite panels so far at the summit. And I'm sure everybody who's logged in would probably be taking back great insights from this. So thank you so much for that. And like Veena ma'am said, Access will take up this challenge and we will bring together 20 relevant people in one room to discuss. So thank you again, everybody. And we hope that you will log into the other sessions as well. With this, we end the technical sessions for today, and we will now move on to the plenary session, which is happening in Hall A, Scaling Up Access to Finance for Agriculture, Understanding Demand Gaps and Innovation for the Next Big Leap. So please log in there, and thank you, panelists, again.
Thank you.